Okay. So you can copy it there, and then you just go and Control V into the formula window section or field, whatever, right there. Just paste it in, and then it should work fine as long as you have the parameters named correctly. Um, so yeah, make sure if you're not getting enough information from the video, reference this as well. Um, all right. So going back to that, going through all the steps and everything, make sure you follow the video. So that's part one. Okay. Part two is what we are going to do this week. And this week is going to be hopefully even smoother than last week because it's a lot less videos. So I only have one video in there for this week. If I go back to the folder. So under week 2, you're going to see this stuff. Okay. So lab 1, part 2. And then this is the assignment Dropbox that I was just in here. Okay. And then quiz 1. So if you go here into lab 1, part 2, this is a hour-and-a-half lecture, and this is going to cover creating your own custom family. And in the video, I demonstrate sort of the procedure of how you could go about creating like a custom light fixture. So what I do in the video is I go to just a website. I go to wayfair.com. They have a lot of just generic like furniture and stuff. And I chose Wayfair because one thing that they don't have on their website is Revit models. Okay, so you're going to run into this a lot where you might want to specify a particular product, for your design, but you go to the manufacturer's website and they don't actually have a Revit model or Revit family for what you want. So then you're left to creating it on your own. So that's exactly why this module that we're covering is so relevant, because there are so many manufacturers, and believe me, like my job, like I briefly mentioned it last week, is creating these models for furniture and different product manufacturers, okay? And there's so many of them that just don't have good Revit stuff. So that's kind of our whole business model is we'll find clients, who are manufacturing these products, and we say to them, look, the whole design industry is moving toward using BIM tools like Revit, and you have to provide good Revit models to designers because nobody wants to sit there and waste time making it on their own. So it's just something that you have to provide nowadays. It's kind of like an expected thing. So that's where I come in with what I do on a daily basis, is doing that and modeling them for these manufacturers. A lot of the times, depending on the manufacturer, they will have some kind of 3D file available. So they might have like a SketchUp file or an AutoCAD .dwg file. You can import those into Revit, but it's best practice to recreate them from scratch. And in a lot of cases, you won't even have any kind of 3D file to reference. So the video that I cover, or this video here, where I'm going into detail about custom families, I'm showing you if you're in a situation where you have very limited information, but you want to use this particular product, how to creatively collect resources to be able to model the thing that you want, okay? So we're basically just going to be working off of a PDF file. You can kind of see it a little bit in the thumbnail there, but it's really just like a PDF line drawing showing some dimensions, and I basically show you the exact process of how you can take that PDF file, and first we take it into Adobe Illustrator, convert it over to usable line work, and then bring that into Revit so that we can reference it directly and model an accurate family. Okay, so some really good stuff in there. So make sure you watch it. But for your actual family that you're creating, you can create anything you want, really. Okay, it doesn't have to be a light fixture. If you want to create like a piece of furniture, or a light fixture, or really any kind of like, I don't know, generic thing, you can. I would stick to probably a piece of furniture. Um, the light fixture is a really good one though, because it is more challenging and you run into light fixtures a lot. So that could be good practice, but really, anything that meets these requirements is totally acceptable. So these are the only things that you have to meet to get a passing or a good grade on the assignment. All right. So at a minimum, using the techniques that I show you in the video, you're going to have to create a family that has at least one nested component. Okay. You should be familiar with nesting if you're going through, or if you went through this week's videos with the shelving unit. A dimension parameter, so that, again, that is covered. Two material parameters, and these material parameters should actually have a material associated with them, which I'll walk you through that a little bit when we get into Revit here in a minute. But basically, I want you to create the material parameters and then create materials that are assigned to those parameters, if it makes sense. And the whole reason for that is just to show that the parameters are actually working. So if I open up your file, at a glance, I can see, oh, they have materials applied to their model. That looks correct. I don't have to go in and do a bunch of digging and like click on a bunch of stuff to make sure that you actually did it correctly. All right. And I show that too in the video. That's covered. So when you're going through that, I'll walk you through that exact process. Just match exactly what I'm doing, where I'm basically assigning like a random color to the different pieces within the model. And then I want you to have two family types. Okay, so a family type would be like, and we talked about this a little bit last week. That would be like what you're doing on the shelving unit, where you have like the gondola unit versus the single-sided unit, and it's just like an option that comes up under the drop-down when you load it into the project. You load it in and it says, oh, which version of the shelving unit do you want? And then you click it and it sets it to be that version, right? So it's really just that. So an example for you guys, if you were doing like, let's say a table, you could have a table that's maybe 36 inches wide by 42 inches deep or something like that. And then a second type that's like 24 inches wide by 36 inches deep. Okay, so as long as you have two of those, you should be fine. I think I had it listed in here somewhere else. I'm not seeing it right now. One thing that I do want you to have in here, I don't know why I don't have it. Oh, right here. Okay, so this sentence, the parameters that you use can be either type or instance parameters, but I want you to use both in your family. So if you watched, and I can review this tonight as we're going through it. If you watched the Introduction to Revit Families lecture, I gave sort of a detailed overview of what a type parameter is and what a instance parameter is. Okay, and I kind of explained when you would want to use one versus the other and what each one is good for. So I want you to incorporate both a type and an instance parameter into your custom family. Okay, pretty simple. Just make sure one is a type, one's an instance. So if you're doing two material parameters, one of the material parameters could be a type and the other one be an instance. But I just want to make sure that you are aware that you can change whether it's a type or an instance and you know how to do it. Okay, that's basically all that is. So as long as you check all those boxes, you should get like 100% on this. So it's not too bad at all. Again, you're going to be submitting 2 separate files. Okay, so shelving unit, then custom family. And then make sure that all your work is 100% your own, because I can check that very easily to see if you did part of it and then passed it along to somebody else, and then they added in their own portion of it, and then you both submitted a file. I can tell that exactly. So make sure you're doing it 100%. And again, you don't want to cheat yourself, right? I hate to harp on people sharing files and stuff, but I run into it every year, and it's just not a fun thing to deal with for anybody. And in the end, it's only hurting you, because this is important stuff that you'll do every day on a job. So you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of the course and actually learning how to do it, so that you don't get put in a position where somebody asks you to do something at your job and you're screwed and don't know how to do it. I've run into it a lot of times, and there's a lot of people who you will come into contact with, and they'll say, oh yeah, I'm a Revit expert, I know how to do all this stuff. And then you say, okay, well, go ahead and do this for me. Here's this, task or whatever. And you hand it to them, and they give it back to you, and it's just completely wrong. Okay, I want you guys to be Revit experts at the end of this, not, I don't want you to be pretending and you don't actually know what you're doing. So the goal is that at the end, you are really good and you understand all the concepts well. So that means doing it on your own and not cheating yourself. All right. Again, the rubric is down here. Okay, so it's pretty simple. I mean, this doesn't give you a lot of information, but it's just an overall breakdown of what I'm looking for on a basic level. And again, if you are checking all these boxes, you're going to get an A. So just make sure that you check all the boxes. All right. The other thing that we have for this week is the quiz. So quiz 1, it's gonna cover all the content from the first 2 weeks. Okay, and you're gonna have until Sunday at midnight to complete it. It's 10 points. There's a 30-minute time limit. You can only take it one time. Okay, so as soon as you start it, you have to take it, or you have to take it within that 30-minute time period. So no starting it and then pausing and coming back to it later. Once you hit go, it's going to keep, the time's ticking. And if you don't finish it, you're going to get whatever your score is at the end without you answering all the questions. So make sure, you get it done within that 30-minute period and you get it finished by Sunday at midnight. And again, I'm not trying to trick you guys. It should be pretty straightforward. Really, the quizzes are there to keep you guys engaged in the class because it is asynchronous, right, for the most part. So I want to make sure that you are getting into the content, paying attention, watching the videos, checking your understanding. Really, that's all it's there for. It's just checking your understanding, and it's not anything more than it needs to be. So I'm not trying to trick you guys. It should be very straightforward, and as long as you are paying attention and following along with all the stuff that you're supposed to be doing throughout the week, then you should get a perfect score, ideally. All right. So that's kind of it for the week. Let's make sure. My computer load. Yep. Okay. So just those 3 things. So really pretty simple, nothing too crazy. Before I get into Revit, does anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself. You can throw it in the chat and, I'll address it. And then if not, I will go ahead and get started. All right. So give you guys 15 seconds. And if nobody has any questions, we'll go ahead. All right. Okay, so I have the actual shelving unit file open. And if you have not finished it yet, this is kind of what that's going to look like when you're finished with it. Okay. So, pretty simple little thing. But the cool thing about these Revit parametric models is, like I showed you last week with that simple box, is if we're just setting up a few basic constraints, like width and depth and height, we can do some pretty cool things. And the big one here is obviously the number of shelves, which is controlled by that array parameter. So as you're going through and you're completing this, it's going to be very important that you flex your families that you're building. Okay, and I kind of touched on this last week, but that's going to, determine if the family is quality or not. If you think that you did it well and then you go in and you change a setting in here and it totally breaks and gives you a bunch of errors, then you have some cleanup to do. So you want to make sure you come in here and kind of just go through everything. And something that we can do, and I don't know if it's going to be reflected in this family, we have this little setting down here called preview visibility. Okay, by default that is set to off, but usually when I'm working in the family editor, I leave this on at all times. Okay, so what this is going to do is basically show you exactly how the family is going to look in the project environment without you having to load it into the project to test it. Okay, and I don't think in this family it's going to make too much of a difference, but in a minute when I show you some other stuff, it's going to make a little bit more sense. But you always want to make sure that that is turned on and you have this sort of yellow preview around your window when you're in the family editor. Okay, this is just a family editor thing. So if I went into a project file, I wouldn't get this option here. All right. So as you're going through and finishing this model up, make sure you're coming in here, toggling through your different types. So I was just on gondola unit. Now I'm going to go to wall unit, and you can see it updates. Make sure you are, changing these different values that we have in here. So if you want to change the number of shelves, for example, right now that's being driven by this formula, but if I were to get rid of that and then change the number of shelves, it should add in a fourth shelf, no problem, right? And it's not doing anything weird either, right? The bottom shelf and the top shelf are staying stationary, and it's adding the new shelves in the middle, and nothing is being like moved up or down, like out of bounds. Okay, so that's exactly what that should do. Is just do a couple and make sure that it's performing as expected. If you see it doing anything weird, like I changed that number and all of a sudden my top shelf is like going all the way up here, you'll probably have to redo your array. Okay, and the array is the thing that makes the multiple shelves, right? So if you have to redo the array, there's a few steps that go into sort of like resetting your model to the point where you can create the array again. So let me just show you that really quick. So let's say I had a problem with it and I want to redo it. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to knock this back down to 2 so that I have less to deal with. Okay, so I just have these two. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to delete out my top shelf. And make sure you're doing this on both sides. Right now I'm in wireframe mode, which is really helpful in a 2D view. If I were to undo that really quick, and if I were just in the default hidden line view, if I deleted this out, it looks like I've gotten, the top shelf, but it's actually, I only did one side, and I can't tell that because I can't see through this back piece here, but when I click on that, you can see that other shelf is still in there on the other side. So it's always helpful to work in wireframe so that you can kind of see through your model like an x-ray, and I'm not like forgetting anything. Okay, so delete both of those. And this is also probably easier to do in a side elevation so I can see both sides at once. But then you want to select both of these. And you see how they have this like blue box around them? That's something that the array tool does automatically when you make an array. It's kind of annoying. It makes a group basically. So anytime you see this blue dash, that means there's a group in the model, and you want to get rid of that before you recreate the array. Because if you don't, then you're basically just arraying the group and it gets like even more complicated. So you want to strip this back as much as possible. So I'm going to select both of these and I'm going to ungroup them. So now I'm just back to both of my shelves. Okay. Then we can redo the array. So if I click on these now and I do my array tool, I want to make sure that I am set to last as my position. The reason being I want the top shelf to be the last shelf in the array. If I set this to second, I'm basically saying where's the second shelf in the array, and that's not what we want to do. We want to constrain it so that we're controlling the position of the last item in the array. Okay, so you want to make sure you do that. This group and associate, that is what creates those blue boxes around the shelves. Okay, so by default, you should leave that checked, and that's going to like let you control the array after the fact with a formula. So we leave that checked, and then all we do is we click on this reference plane right here where it says bottom shelf height, and we go up to the top position where we want our upper shelf to be. So we want that to be aligned with this reference plane. All right. So now that that's in, we click off of it, and then we have to select this little bracket looking thing with the number. So this is the actual like array itself. So when we select that, we're able to then tie our parameter to control the array to it. So that's right up here, this little label. And I already had that in there previously. If you haven't done that, it's in the instructions, but you basically are just creating a parameter from here. But I'm going to be tying that to number of shelves. Okay, so now it says number of shelves equals 2. And I can go in then and I can control the number of shelves, and it should work correctly, right? Another thing that you're going to want to do, and I think this should be covered in the instructions, it's always good practice to lock your shelves to the reference plane. So these top shelves right now, I didn't lock them to this reference plane. So if I were to make this shelving unit taller, there is a chance that this upper shelf would not move with the height change. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Revit is very weird in different situations. So it's always better to err on the side of caution and just lock things whenever you have the chance to make sure that nothing breaks. So I will flex it really quick to test it. If I do 8 feet for the height, see what I mean? So this moved up, but because that was not locked, it didn't move with it. So what I want to do is use my align tool and align and lock the top of this shelf to my reference plane, right? So now you saw everything kind of updated, and it moved this to be in the new midpoint between the bottom shelf and the top shelf, which is perfect. So now that that's locked, I can go back here again, flex my height back down to 7 feet, and hopefully it all moves like it should. Like that. Okay? So this is what I mean by flexing. Okay? You want to go in, change these numbers around, and make sure nothing unpredictable happens. Okay? Because it happens to me constantly on a daily basis. Even though this is like literally the only thing that I do every day. And I'll build something and I'll think, okay, I did a good job. It's good to go. but then I'll load it into a project and actually test it, and there's all kinds of things wrong with it, and I'm like, oh well, I should have checked that before I went through all the trouble of loading it into the project and stuff. So believe me, it happens to all of us, right? So you just want to make sure that you're really, taking a hard look at everything you're doing here, being very conscious of what's going on so that nothing is breaking, right? So make sure you're checking all that. Okay, so with that out of the way, any questions associated with that? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up something else. But in the meantime, if you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat or hop on your mic. All right, so really quickly, what I want to do is review the concept of nesting because it's very important, and there's a lot that goes into nesting. Even though it's heavily covered in what we did in week 1, we just want to reinforce those concepts because people forget, and Revit is very complicated in a lot of ways, and it's very easy to forget little things, especially in Revit, just because there's so many layers to it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start just a new simple family, and let's do this as a furniture family to begin with. Okay, so let's say I want to walk you through the process of building a simple dining table. Okay, you can take what I'm doing here, as inspiration for your part 2 of this assignment that we're doing this week. If you want to do a piece of furniture, you could kind of replicate what I'm doing here instead of doing a light fixture, right? But make sure you still watch the light fixture video because it's very important, and it's on the quiz too, some of the stuff. So I'm going to just make a very basic table, and I'm going to demonstrate just a lot of different concepts to you guys, hopefully, to reinforce some of the stuff that we covered last week. Okay, so when I start a family, the first thing I want to do is break it down into all of its individual components, and I want to think about how the person who is going to use this family is going to be interacting with it. Now, the way I build families is going to be very different from the way that you build families because I am building families for interior designers to use and architects to use, okay? You are building a family for your own use. So, however far you want to take it for it to be usable by your own standards might differ from me. Whereas I'm trying to build this so that everybody can use it and understand it in equal amount, right? I'm trying to appeal to a very broad audience with the way that I build families out, and you're just trying to appeal to yourself because it's for your own project, right? So you don't have to worry about a lot of the stuff. But it's good to know these things, right? So when I start a family, I like to think, okay, how is the designer or architect going to interact with this? Are they going to understand Revit very well? Are they going to know, all the options they have available to them when they're placing this? And if not, I want to cater to people who maybe are newer to Revit, right? I want to make the family as simple and easy to use as possible. Okay. So once I do that, I also then am thinking about how is this family going to be structured in terms of like the pieces that go into it. So nested components, for example. So if I think about a dining room table, the first thing I think of is, okay, it's going to have the top, obviously, and then it's going to have the legs, if we're just thinking about a very basic sort of table. Now, if this is going to be a more complex table, maybe I would think about, instead of making the top and the legs all together in the same family, maybe instead I would do the top sort of in its own family and then build the legs separately and nest the legs into the top family, right? And that sounds like overcomplicated. Like, why would you do that? What's the purpose of that if you can just build it straight all in the same family? And the reason is some things that you're going to see now. All right. So starting out with that sort of idea, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the leg of the family first in its own family file. Okay, so if I'm going to build this leg, I'm going to go to a front view. And I think maybe I will do this leg as a revolve, okay? Now, I'm making this up, so this is probably going to be a really ugly table, but it's just for demonstration, okay? So don't make fun of me. So I'm going to do a revolve, and if you remember from last week, a revolve is basically you're just drawing a profile and spinning it around a central axis. So my example was a wine glass, right? I just drew the profile, half of it, and then I defined my axis, and I said spin this around 360 degrees, and poof, magically, there was a wine glass. Okay, so with a leg of a table, very similar idea. When they make legs, they're going to be turning them like on a lathe. Okay, so it's the exact same sort of idea. And interestingly enough, some of the 3D programs that you might use in the future will have a command in them called lathe, and that's basically the same thing as a revolve, but they just call it different things sometimes. So I'm starting out here defining my central axis, and I want that to align on my origin, right? My origin is the center point of the family file, and I know where that is because I have those reference planes in there by default. And if I'm drawing on the center reference plane, I'm drawing at the origin. So there's my central axis. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to think about, what is my profile of the leg going to look like? So let's go ahead and choose just the flat line tool. And I'm going to start out by drawing part of the base. Okay. So my base, if I'm thinking about a table leg, it's probably going to have a diameter somewhere around 1.5 inches, 2 inches at the very bottom, if we're doing like a circular one. Okay, so I'm drawing half of it, so I'm going to draw this out like 1 inch. Okay. All right, so now let's say I want my leg to have a little bit of taper to it as it goes up. So I want it to get a little bit bigger at the top. So I'm going to go up here, just a random amount, it doesn't matter. I'm going to start drawing out this way, just a little bit bigger. So maybe it's got a slight flare to it, and by the time it gets to the top, the diameter is going to be, let's say 3 inches. So I'm going to draw this out. Let's go 1.5. And then make sure that I'm moving this back to my center line there. Okay, so we have our 2-inch diameter at the bottom, and then over the course of the height of this leg, it's going to be getting 1.5 inches bigger in size. Okay, so now I'm just going to connect the two of these together so I get my little taper. And this is also an annoying thing about Revit, right? Revit loves to do annoying stuff like this, which really drives me crazy. So right now I can't really snap to it because when you get to a certain tolerance, it wants to go straight. So sometimes you have to find creative ways around this. So let me try it from the bottom up and see if that will let me. Of course it does not. All right. Let's just get it as close as we can and pretend that we got it there. I don't know why they do it like that. I don't know why Revit does that. Super, super annoying. Sometimes it just literally makes it impossible so that you cannot draw it to the dimension that you're wanting, and it's so, so infuriating. All right, so we have a slight taper there, and I'm going to close off the end of my line there. All right. So now let's think about details that this leg will have to make it a little bit more interesting looking. First of all, the leg is probably going to have a little bit of a rounded edge here at the bottom. It's not always going to be a perfect hard crease, right? We want to make things look a little bit more realistic when we can, so it like renders nicely whenever you're rendering it. So what I like to do is use this tool right here. This is the Fillet Arc tool. I showed you this last week. This lets you click two intersecting lines and then create a radius between them. Okay, so I'm just going to click those two and place this radius. And then once the radius is placed, you can select it, go in here, and you can change the value to whatever you want. So usually for like small things on furniture, I stick to a 1/8 inch radius or 1/16 inch. So let's try 1/8 and see if that looks okay proportionally. Yeah, I think that's fine. And then maybe we want to add a little bit more detail to this. So maybe I want to add in some kind of like bead detail toward the bottom. So let's come up like, I don't know, 3 inches from the bottom. And then I'm going to intersect my outer line right there. And then let's add in a little like bead detail. And you'll see what I mean here in a minute. So what I'm going to do is split this line here at this point using my split tool, split element. Just hover over your line at that point and click, and it'll create a split for you. And then we can make a little bead detail. First, I'm going to copy this to my clipboard like that. Click it and Control C. And then use this fillet arc to make a nice fillet right here. Okay. And then I'm going to paste again. It's going to give me a little error saying, okay, you've already made a mistake because it's over top of the other line. But now I'm going to do the same thing here. And let's just do it like that. And then we'll set our radius to be the same. So 1/8 and 1/8. Okay, and then I'll get rid of these lines. Okay, so now those should be meeting up at the same spot, right? We'll see. We'll see if Revit gets mad at me if I did something wrong. It'll tell me. All right, I did it right. So if I were to look at this in a 3D view, you can kind of see what we got going on here. We got a small little nice like bead detail going on there at the bottom. Okay, and then we get a nice flare as we get higher up on the leg. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is add in some dimensional constraints so that we can flex this and make it higher or shorter because we want different heights to our table. So going back to our front view, there's a few ways that you can go about doing this, and it's really situational. Typically what you want to do is after you create the geometry, you want to go ahead and add in your reference plane like this. So I'm going to create a reference plane here at the top of the leg, and then I'm going to align the two of these together like that and lock. So now they're moving together as I'm expecting them, right? The other way that you could do that, if I delete this out, is you can actually do it within the sketch of the geometry. So if I click on the revolve and go here to edit revolve, when I'm in sketch mode, I can actually add in reference planes in sketch mode and tie the sketch geometry to the reference plane like that. Okay, so if I were to do it this way and then add in my dimension to get my height, and we always want to tab here when we go down to the reference level. You want to hover over this and tab and make sure you're clicking on the dashed line, and you want to say reference plane. We don't want it to be that where it says level. Okay, we want it to be this. So if I were to do that and then finish, well actually set this to be a height. set that to instance. See what happens. So when I finished the sketch mode, all of that stuff went away and it's hidden now and I can't see where it is. If I were to click on this button here, reveal constraints, I can get a preview of hidden constraints that are hidden within sketch mode. But usually you don't want to do this because it's harder to tell what's going on in the file, right? Like I can't see that it's in there unless I go into the sketch. So rule of thumb, always do it outside of sketch mode. Okay, so again, I'm going to create my, whoops, not reference line, reference plane, like that. Align and lock, and then annotate aligned dimension to the bottom reference plane, and set this to be my height. Okay, so now I can see it outside of sketch mode, which is cool. Okay, so going into my family types, I now can see that I have a height dimension parameter in here, and I can flex it, make sure it works. Let's try 5 feet. Perfect. Does exactly what I want it to do. Okay, when I made that, I set it to be a instance parameter. All right, so hopefully we understand sort of the difference between the two. In this case, though, why did I set that to be an instance parameter? The reason is when I'm bringing this into the actual table family with the top and everything, if you set it to be an instance parameter, it's going to give you more flexibility and make it easier for you to make it move up and down with the height of like the top of the table. If I made this a type parameter, it's going to be tied to these family types. So, you know, type 1 could be 36 inches. And as I set this to be 36 inches, it's going to move, and then if I create another one, 42, right? 42. So we have two types here now. So that's kind of like when you would use a type parameter. But seeing as a table can be pretty much any height, we kind of want to leave the leg open to like any height so that we have more control in the actual family model. All right. So I'm going to delete those types back out and switch this back to instance. And you're going to see in a minute why that's also really helpful. Okay, so we have our leg. Cool. Something else that we want to do now is make sure that when we put this into the table family, we can change the material that gets assigned to the leg. Okay? So when you create a piece of geometry, by default, you can't control what material is assigned to it, and it's going to have this gray color, okay? If we want to be able to control the material, we have to click on the geometry, and then come over here to Materials and Finishes, and you can do two things. One, if you're lazy, you can click on, and it's really not being lazy, it takes 2 extra seconds to do it the better way. You can click on the actual material right there and change it to something else. So if I set this to glass, for example, okay, it's set to glass, right? But if I were to load this into a project, I would not be able to edit it within the project. I would have to reopen the family and click on it here and then change it there. I could not just do that directly from the project file, which is bad. So what you want to do is what's called associating family parameters. That's the technical term for it. Basically all it is it's giving you a hyperlink from the project file to this control for the material within the family. Okay? The way that we do that is with this tiny little button right here, which it doesn't even really even look like a button, right? This is a reason why Revit is like, people hate it because it's designed so poorly from a user interface perspective, right? How would anybody look at this without hovering their mouse over it and know that that's actually a button that they can click or like what it does? It's so small that it looks insignificant, but it's actually very, very important, which is just insane. I guess a good side of that is if somebody doesn't know what they're doing, it's harder for them to mess stuff up and break things. But yeah, you want to click on that. Let me back up one step. And that's going to say, it's going to bring up this window. And it's going to say associate family parameter. And it's going to give you a list here for family parameters that you can associate, right? So right now it says none because there's nothing in here. So what we have to do is create a new parameter with this little button here. And this is going to bring up the same window that we've already been using with like the dimensions, right? But instead of it being a dimension parameter, now it's a material parameter. And you can see right here it's grayed out and it says I'm making a material parameter, okay? So that's exactly what we want. And again, we can set this to be a type parameter or an instance parameter. Okay, so I'm going to call this leg. Right? You can name it whatever you want. Just make sure it's something that's descriptive enough so that you know what it's controlling. And then I'm going to set this in this case to be a type parameter. Okay. It's really personal preference a lot of the time, but I'll show you in a minute why it makes it just a little bit easier. It's very confusing. Sometimes you want to type, sometimes it's instance. It's the fun of Revit. Okay. So now, if I were to go back to my family types up here, you can see under materials and finishes, I get this control for the leg finish, right? And if I click on these three little buttons there, I can go in and set this to be whatever I want. So I'll switch it to default. Cool, it works. Perfect. In your case, when you're building your own family, the thing that I said in the instructions, where I was like, let me pull it up really quick, where I said materials should be applied within the family. They can be a simple color just to show that the parameters work. What I mean by that is you can create a new material and you can call it just like, I don't know, a color, red, and then go in here under appearance. And this is the appearance tab is what it will look like when you render it. So you want to go here under appearance and set the color to be the color. So I'll click red here. All right. And then under graphics, I'm just going to click use render appearance. So now it's going to appear red kind of regardless of my view settings. So now that I click OK, you can see it changed to red. So I know it's working. So when you're setting this up, just create a few different material parameters, red, green, blue, and assign the different pieces of the family a different color so that I can visually see that you did it right. Okay, but to make this a little bit prettier, because we're designers, right? Let's go ahead and create a nice wood material, okay? So I'm going to rename this material. I'm going to call it maybe oak. And then we're going to go here under appearance and we're going to click on this little button here. This is the replace asset button. And again, very small, tiny button that nobody would know what it does unless, somebody told them, right? So when we click on that, we get this thing here called the asset browser. What the asset browser is it's basically a bunch of pre-made materials that are built into Revit that come with it by default, that always are sitting here ready for you to use so that you don't have to go through the effort of making a bunch of common materials if you don't want to, right? When we're rendering stuff, and we're going to get more into this later on in the course, you're going to be making a lot of materials, and usually it's custom stuff that is specific to the particular project and design. But in a lot of cases, there's a bunch of materials that are super common everywhere. Stainless steel, for example. Stainless steel always looks the same. Aluminum, brass, brick, all of those things always look the same. So what Revit did is they took all of those kind of common materials and they built them into the program so that you can just pull them into your project super easily without having to manually create them from scratch, right? And these are always available to you. So there's a huge collection. And if you want to, you can kind of go through and look at what all is in here. But what I do is for pretty simple stuff like this, you know, if I want a particular type of wood, I can type in oak. And it's going to bring up everything that matches what I search for. So we can see we have oak, and we have like the oak, white oak, whichever one you want you can use. We have flooring, so this one is going to be like planks of like wood flooring. The other ones that just say oak are going to be like a wood grain, which is kind of what I'm looking for. And I usually like this white oak one at the bottom, so I'm going to use that. So when I find one that I want, you hover over this little button, again, tiny little button all the way to the right, and you click on that. And what that's going to do is it's going to replace your settings over here under appearance with the predefined settings of that material in this window. Okay. So when you're happy with that, you want to exit out of it. And now I have an oak material and it looks right, and we have a nice image that we can map to the geometry. Okay, so I'll click apply and OK, and you can see it changed color, and now it says oak, which is cool. All right, so now if I were to change my viewport mode, right down here, this is the viewport mode. I'm set to shaded right now. If I set that to realistic, I'll be able to actually see the wood grain texture that has been applied. Okay, so now it actually looks like a piece of wood. Okay, so that is pretty good for this leg. What I want to do really quickly, let me think here. Yeah, okay. So what I want to demonstrate now is incorporating choice into the family. So let's say I wanted to have this round turned leg, but then I also want to have a square leg. Okay, so there's a few ways that we can go about doing that. If I go to my floor plan view, reference level, I'm going to just create a really basic extrusion to be a square leg. All right, so if I click extrusion in my top view, let's go ahead and just draw an extrusion that matches the dimensions of the top of the leg here. So I just drew these two lines here, and then I'm going to mirror these across like this. And then I'm going to use this tool here to trim and extend to clean this up and get a square. Okay, very simple. All right. Now that I have done that, I'm going to just add those nice little fillets to the edge so that I don't have hard corners. So I'm just going to do that on all four corners. I'm going to go back and click on all these and set them to 1/8 of an inch. And I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys right now, but just remember, these sessions are all recorded, so you'll be able to go back and rewatch this if anything doesn't make sense. Okay, so now that I've done that, if I really wanted to, I could even add in controls here to make the leg bigger if I wanted to have that level of flexibility, but we'll keep it simple, so I'm not going to add that in. So I ended my extrusion. Now I'm going to go back to my front elevation, and I just want to make sure that the height of my extrusion matches the height here, okay? So we're going to lock it like that. And now essentially what we have is a wooden post in the exact same spot as our turned leg. Okay, so we have our square leg and we have our turned leg in the same place. So if I were to load this into the family, it's going to look like we just have exactly what you see here, two legs on top of each other, which isn't good. So we need a way to control which leg is being shown inside of the table family. And the way that we do that is with a new kind of parameters. Okay, so we went through dimension parameters already to change the sizes of things. We went through material parameters, and now we're going to introduce visibility parameters. Okay, so with a visibility parameter, I can tell Revit if I want a turned leg, hide the square leg so I can't see it, and vice versa. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to click on my geometry. Let me set this back to a shaded view so it's easier to tell what's going on. I'm going to click on my post for the square leg, and I'm going to assign the exact same leg material to this because I want them both to have the same material. Okay, so now that's going to show up as wood, which is perfect. Next thing is this section here that says visible. Okay, so with this visible section, we again have an associate family parameter button. Okay, and I'm going to click on this button, and I'm going to create a new parameter called like leg visibility or something. So new parameter, and let's see. I'm going to call this square leg. Okay, and I'm going to leave this as a type. Okay, so square leg, click on it again. We can see now that's grayed out. It's got the equal sign. That means it's been successfully linked. And then I'm going to click on my turned leg. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to call this one turned leg. Okay. All right, just like that. All right, so now what do we get? If I were to turn on my preview visibility, this is the thing I told you about earlier. We get the yellow preview going around our window. If I go to my family types window, I'm going to get these two controls here underneath of this other section. Okay, and actually let me switch where those are in this list. So what I like to do is switch this from other to a different category, like construction. Yeah, construction. And this doesn't really matter, this thing here. It's really just an organizational thing. So it's just to make it easier on yourself. But I like to put it under construction because construction starts with C, and that's going to push these higher in this list here and make it easier for like somebody using the family to interact with, because they don't have to scroll through a long list of parameters. Okay, so you'll see what will happen when I click OK. It's going to make a new category here called construction and move that square leg up here toward the top of the list under constraints. Right. It doesn't do anything other than move it, and it's just for organization. Okay, so that's optional, but that's something I like to do. Okay, so we have square leg and we have turned leg. Next thing that we have to do is create a family type for each one. Okay, so a family type is, like I said, you could have multiple different like sizes, for example, of a family. So I'm going to do, again, one for square leg. Okay, then we're going to do another one for turned leg. All right, so we have two of these, but if I switch between them right now, nothing happens. And that's because the check boxes that indicate is this thing visible or not are both turned on in both cases. What I want is for, on turned leg, square leg to be off, like that, so it shows like a turned leg. And if I set this to square leg, I want the opposite to be true. So I want turned leg to be off, right? Like that. And again, if I did not have preview visibility on, if I turn that off, you can see I can still see the turned leg there. So that's why you want to have it on. Okay, that's a good example of why you want that. Okay, so easy enough. This is doing what we want. It's hiding one and showing the other based on the type of leg. But to take this one step further, and this is, for example, where I say this is something I might do, but you don't necessarily have to do it, but it's a good practice, okay? I want to think about, okay, the person who's using Revit, do they really understand Revit very well? Is there a possibility that they could make a mistake and not understand why that mistake is happening and know how to fix it? So I like to eliminate the possibility of somebody making a mistake whenever I can. To do that, we're going to use formulas, okay? And this is where formulas are really handy. I can make a formula that will say, if I have square leg on, make it so that it's impossible for me to turn on the turned leg and vice versa. Okay? And it's really, really simple to do. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one of these parameters. It can be either one. And I'm going to write a formula that says turn the other one off if this one is turned on. So all you got to do this is, if I were to do this for square leg, I would type not, parentheses, and then this parameter name, turned leg. And this is case sensitive. It has to be exactly correct. But as long as you type it like this and hit enter, you can see, you might have missed it if you blinked, this is now grayed out. Okay, and I don't have the option to check it anymore if I wanted to, right? So that eliminates error, okay? If I were to uncheck this box now, automatically it checks because it's being controlled by the formula. And I can't change it unless I do this. But this makes it impossible for me to check both at the same time, right? So that's pretty cool. All right, so we're going to leave that as turned leg, and then we're going to switch back to square leg again. Perfect. It switches over to square leg, and I just want to flex these, make sure that they're all working correctly. Okay, cool. And then for our height, let's try that. So 3 foot 6 inches, and hit apply. Okay, cool. And then square leg, hit apply, and we'll set that again, 3 foot 6 inches. Okay, so that's working exactly as we want it. Okay, so that was a lot just for a simple little leg. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to nest this into the actual table family that has the top, okay? Before I get to that again, any questions, go ahead and pipe up or throw it in the chat, all right? But I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start the other part of this with the actual table. So we're going to go new family, and then we're going to go to English Imperial, right? And then we're going to find our furniture category, furniture template. Okay, so now we're in a new template. And as you're working in Revit, if you don't know this already, you're going to get all these tabs here at the top, which gets really, really annoying. And basically, it's all, it's hard to keep track of. And you're like, I don't know what file is what, and it's very annoying. Why do I have all these? So what I like to do periodically is go up here and click this button here at the top, close inactive views. That's going to collapse all those and just leave me with one tab for each file, okay? Which makes it a lot easier to move around between files. That's also available here under View. So if you click on View, you'll have a button here. If I were to open up another view here, you can see it activates because I have 2 views now for this file. And then I can just click that. It'll knock it down to 1. Okay. So this new file here is going to be what's called the host family. The host family is the actual table itself, okay? So anything that needs to be nested is going to be loaded into the host family, and then all the other geometry that makes up the table is going to be built within the host family and not nested in separately, okay? So the legs are nested, the top is not nested. The top is just built directly in this file. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to nest my leg family in. So to do that, we're going to switch back to our leg family. Then we're going to go, let me think here. We could save this right now, and that would be a good thing to do, is to save this and give it a name so that it doesn't appear as family 1. Whoops. family1 in the project file, but let's go ahead and just load this in. Okay, so I'm going to click on load into projects, and I'm going to check on family2. So that's that new family I just made. Okay, and then it's going to prompt me to go ahead and place this into my viewport. So I'll just drop one somewhere in the viewport. Now, so that this doesn't show up as family1 here when I click on it, right? If you were to do file save as and save this, it would then take on the new name and not call it that. But if you load it into a project and it's called family1 whatever, you can click on it, go over here to the left side under families, find the category for it, so furniture, and right there you can see family1, and all you got to do is right click on this and then rename it. So I'm going to call this leg. All right, so we have leg, and then we have square leg and turn leg. So if I click on that now, it says leg, square leg, and turn leg. So that's perfect. Okay, next thing that we have to do, and this is why Revit gets so complicated, is nesting it is not good enough. So now that we've nested it, we have to go through the effort of taking all of the parameters that we built into this leg and tying them into new parameters within this host family file. All right. So for example, if I were to create a new project just to illustrate this, okay, so there's my new project file. If I go back to the leg family and load this into the project file, and this is something people get very confused about, so I want to make sure that it's crystal clear for you. So I took the leg family and I load it directly into the project. So you can see it says family1, this is the square leg. Okay. When I click on that and I go to edit type, I have control over all of those family types and all of the settings that I made within the family. So I can change the material, I can change the visibility settings, I can change the height right here. If I were to, right now, let's just move this to the center of the template. If I were to take the host family that has the leg nested into it and load it into the project file, so they look identical, right? This one, when I click on it and I go to edit type, I don't have any of those controls and I don't have any of those types built into it, right? I lose control over all of that. And the reason is because I did not associate the family parameters when I nested it into the host family, okay? Sounds confusing, but it's an easy thing to fix. So all you got to do is whenever you nest a family in, this should be the very first thing you do. Click on that family after you placed it in the viewport. Go ahead and find all of the parameters that you want to have access to within the project. In this case, I don't need to worry about height. Height only needs to be controlled within the family, okay? So don't worry about that. I do want to control material, okay? So I'm going to go in here, edit type, to right here, and we get our little button again within the type properties section, okay? So I can click on that, and it's going to ask me to tie the leg material to a new parameter within the host family file, okay? You can kind of think of this as just like linking one thing to the other. So right now it says there's no material parameters in the host family, so we're going to click on new parameter, and we're going to call this leg. It can be the exact same thing. So call that leg, set it as a type parameter, click OK. Now that grays out, and it says that this is associated with the family parameter in the family. So now I click OK. All right. Now, if I go to the family types window for the host family, here you can see leg, oak, and I have control over it. Okay, and I can set that to whatever I want to be. Now, if I were to load this into the project again and overwrite the old version, and click on it, go to the edit type. Now I can control the material within the project because I linked it. I linked it from the nested family to the host family, and I get control over it here. Okay? So, I don't know. Hopefully that's clear. It's a really confusing concept, especially when people have never done it before. But it should be something that you've done in the shelving unit assignment. So hopefully you get the idea of it. But I just wanted to make sure you guys are crystal clear on that because it's a really easy thing to overlook. And it's even something that you'll run into with families you download from the internet. Like all the time when I would do projects in school, when I was in your guys' position, I would download a family from a website, and then I'd go and I would try to change the material of something about that family. Maybe it was the leg, right? And when I go to set the material, the leg would not change. And it was because of this exact problem, because whoever built it didn't know what they were doing, okay? So I want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence and covering all our bases. Okay, so that has linked through correctly. Next thing that we want to do is we want to think about our spacing on our legs, and then we'll worry about the top. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just mirror this to all 4 quadrants. And I can select both of these now, and I can mirror this. So I have one leg on each side of my reference planes. Okay, now, because we built our leg at the origin within the nested file, right? We built it here. We get access to reference planes that are running through the center of the leg. So if I were to try to align this and I click the align tool and hover over the leg, you can see I get these blue lines. All right, and if I let that sit there for a second, you can see what pops up. So it says furniture leg, square leg. So that's the family. Oops. And then it's telling me what reference plane in the family that is. So it says center, left, right. Okay. And if I hover over this, what does it tell me? It says reference plane, center, left, right. So that vertical line is the exact same thing as this vertical line in the host family. All right. So that's pretty cool. And we can create as many of these as we want. So really quickly, if I go back to here, let's say I wanted a reference plane on the outside of this. So let's say I want to control the spacing of the legs, not from the middle of the leg, but from like the outer edge of the leg. All I have to do is go here to reference plane and draw a reference plane that's aligned with the outer edge of the leg. And click on it. I'll name it side of leg. Oops. Side of leg. And then over here where it says is reference, by default it will make it weak reference, and that's fine. As long as it says anything other than not a reference, it'll work. Okay, so I set that to weak reference, click OK. Load it back into the host family. So that was family 2. And it's going to say, do I want to overwrite the existing one? So I'll just say overwrite existing. Now, if I use my align tool, you can see I get an option to align to the left side of that leg, right? Which I did before, but it works better with the reference plane. So now what I could do is annotate aligned and go from here to here to here, right? And then equalize that. But that's not a good thing to do. And this is why. So it's telling me you don't want to do that. Revit will yell at you if you try to do exactly what I did. So what I did here is I tried to align this to reference planes built within the leg family, okay? What you want to do, whenever you create this and nest something in, is create new reference planes. Okay, so I'll do one on each side again. Right there, there, and here. And I'm going to align and lock it to the center of all of these. So align and lock to all of these. Okay. And this is just like I talked last week. We want to build a skeleton and we want to flex the skeleton, all right? We don't want to flex the muscle or the actual geometry. We're flexing the skeleton. So align that there. You do it on all of them like that. And then align it there. And align it there. Okay, so now I can test this. I can flex it. So I click on one reference plane and move it in and out. And you can see both move. Right? Same thing on the other side. Okay. And then we'll do up and down. Perfect. Up and down. Okay. All right, so we tied all the reference planes to the geometry by aligning and locking. Now what we have to think about is what kind of a table is this going to be and how much control do we want over its dimensions? Do we want it to always be a square table, or do we want it to have the ability to be a rectangular table? If we want it to always be a square table, first of all, what we want to do is do our equality constraints regardless, like that, equalize them in both directions. Okay. Now it's going to move in and out the same on both sides. Okay. But now let's say, okay, I know this is always going to be a square table. I don't want to have to worry about it ever being a rectangular table. In that case, what you can do is create your dimension parameters. So annotate aligned, dimension here and dimension here. And then you could select both of these at the same time by hitting the control key and clicking on both of them. And then create your parameter up here under label. So you can see I'm making a length parameter, and I'm going to call this length and width. And it's going to make them the same. Okay, so we'll click OK. And now you can see they are the same parameter. So when I do one thing to one, it's going to do it to the other, right? See that? How now they're moving diagonally because the numbers are updating at the same time because it's the same parameter, right? So that's perfect for if I always want it to be a square. Let's say, though, I want this to be a rectangular thing, okay? So I'm going to instead click on this dimension here and create a new parameter, and we'll call this one length. All right. Now we have this one called length and width. All I'm going to do with that is I'm going to rename it. So go to my family types, length and width, click on the pencil to edit, and we're just going to rename this to width. All right. So we have length and width independent, and now I can control them independently and make this a rectangle if I want to. Okay, perfect. Now that the legs are set, we're going to worry about the top. Okay. So before I draw the top, I want to add in more reference planes to define where the top's going to go. So create reference plane. And now I'm just going to drop these in roughly where I want them to go, but not worry about dimension at this point. So we'll drop one in on the outside of all four of our legs. Okay. And now let's say, okay, I know that I want my overhang to always be a fixed amount from the center of the leg. Okay. So what I can do in this case is click on my reference plane, and I'm going to get this little temporary dimension that pops up. Okay. So when I click on that, I click on this little button here to make this a permanent dimension. It's going to do this for me. It's going to make me a little dimension there. And then again, click on my reference plane. And if you click on a reference plane, you get the option when the dimension goes small like that to edit it. So I can now set this to the dimension that I want. And let's say I want this to be, I don't know, 4 inches always, okay? So this is the edge of my table here. So now I'm going to lock this dimension, and that's going to keep that at a fixed distance of 4 inches from the center of the table leg at all times. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing in this direction. Okay, so again, click on this reference plane, click on this button here, and then I'm going to move this back. Just click and drag it, just moving it out of the way. Okay, now that's out of the way, click again on the reference plane. The dimension went small, so now I can edit it. I'm going to, again, type 4 inches. And then I'm going to lock this. So click on it and then lock it. Okay, so you could also do the exact same thing for this one on this side and this one here, right? I could do the same thing, create that and set the dimension, blah, blah, blah. Or you can use an equality constraint now. So again, I can go annotate aligned from the outer edge of my tabletop to the center to this. And because I locked this dimension here at 4 inches, it's going to always match the other side to it automatically when I set this to EQ. Okay. So now that's set to EQ, and it's the same dimension over here, and I don't even have to do that aligning and locking stuff with it. And then we'll do the same thing here. Like that. Okay? So now it's consistent all the way around. Okay, so we're almost there with the top. Last thing is to actually draw the geometry for the top. So create extrusion, and then we will go here to rectangle, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle from one corner to the other. And then I'm going to lock all 4 of these to the reference planes. And in this case, it didn't snap, so move it up and lock it like that. And then, let's see. I might add a little radius to this so that it looks a little bit nicer, like I like to do. So I'm going to add a little radius to all 4 sides. And let's make this a little bit bigger. So let's go like 2 inches on all corners. Whoops. And this is also something you can make parametric. So yeah, this is a good example. So what I'm doing right now is when you're setting a radius, you can click on this to make it a dimension, okay? And then you can click on the dimension, and just like anything else, you can make this parametric. So I can create a parameter here, and I could call this top corner radius, okay? And for the heck of it, let's make this an instance parameter. So top corner radius, okay? Now all the rest of these do the same thing. Just create a dimension like that. Click on all my dimensions, holding my control key to select all 3 at the same time. And I'm going to go up here to my parameters, and I'm going to set this to be top corner radius. And it's automatically going to make all of them 2 inches, okay? Which is pretty cool. So now, if I were to go to a 3D view, that looks awful, but we can fix it. But you can see now I have my top, which is very fat and in the wrong spot. And if I were to go to my family types, I have a control over top corner radius, and I could set this there to whatever I want, and it's going to update. See that? Pretty cool. All right, set that back to 2 inches. All right, so now I got to fix where my tabletop is located. So we're going to want to go to an elevation view for this. So I'll go to my back elevation. Now I'm going to create a couple reference planes. So I'm just going to make 2 of them here. And I'm going to establish how thick I want my top to be. I could also make the top thickness parametric if I wanted to change that in the project, but something like that doesn't really matter. So let's go 1.5 inches, like that. And now I want these two reference planes to stay at a fixed 1.5 inch spacing. So I'm just going to click one of them, get my temporary dimension that pops up, click the dimension, click off of it, and then lock it like that. So now they're locked together, and when I move one, they'll move together and stay at 1.5 inches. Okay, so the next step then is to drag. I can click on my extrusion, drag it, and snap it to my top reference plane there and lock it. And then do the same thing right here and snap it and lock it there. Let's go to a different view so it's a little bit easier to follow. There we go. Okay, so I snapped it there, and now my top is going to move and stay 1.5 inch thickness. All right. Next thing would be tying the legs so that they always stay underneath of the top. And this is where making the height of the legs an instance parameter is useful, because doing that gives you these little grips. So just like what I did here with the extrusion, because I made the height an instance, I can do the same thing with the legs. Okay, so that's why an instance is handy. So now I can just drag that and snap it and lock it for all four of them. Okay. And then, as you can see, I can't see through that leg, so let's go to wireframe. So I can click on that now, and I can lock it there. Okay, cool. All right, so we have a very oddly proportioned table, but now that everything is kind of set up how we want it to be, we can go ahead and start playing with this a little bit, okay? So let's create a few types. So let's say I want my first type to be 36 inch wide by 42 inch long by 30 inch high. Okay, I'm going to copy this. Click OK. So there's our first type. Now I'm going to go ahead and start setting the dimensions to match what I just typed there. So length is 42. Okay. Width is going to be 36. Okay. That update's fine. And I don't have my height, so I'm going to have to add that really quick. Go back to the back elevation. Add in a dimension. Right like that. And this will be my height.
This might answer your question. On average, men are 5 feet 9 inches.
Alexa's talking to me now, so that's funny. Okay. Set that to height, make it a type. Cool. All right, so now I can control the height, and I'll set that to 30 inches. There you go. All right, so there's my first type. Second type, let's go 24 by 36 by 24. Okay. 24 by length 36 by 24. Okay, and that did what I wanted it to do. Perfect. And now that's good for types, but there's a couple more things. So for example, the material for the top is not an option right now. And also, I don't have control over my leg type. Okay, so we got to fix that. So going into my legs, I can click on one of them and go here to edit type. I can do this a couple ways, okay? First way I could do this is with linking my visibility parameter that I set up for the legs. Okay, so you can see I have the square leg and I have the turned leg. So I get an option to link one of them. Okay, so I can basically just create the same parameters here in the host file. So this is the first way we can do it. I will type turned leg and make it the same. And let's make it an instance. Okay, so turned leg. And then if I go in here to the family types, sorry if I'm going too fast, I went back to family types up here within the host family. I can make a new parameter within here, okay? And this is kind of confusing, but sometimes you have to make parameters here. Really only visibility parameters is if it's going to be an issue where you have to do it from the family types box. But I'm going to call this one square leg to match what I had before. Okay, so this one is also going to be an instance, and because I'm making it from here, I have to set type of parameter to be yes, no. Yes, no is the type of parameter that gives you that little checkbox right there. So we'll set this to construction to move it higher in the list. Same with this one. I'm going to change that so it's construction. It's going to move it up. Okay, so they're both up there just like it was in the nested family. And now I'll recreate my formula. So for turned leg, I'm going to say not square leg. All right, click apply. And now if I uncheck this and click apply, you can see it changes. Exactly what I wanted to do. Okay, so that's the first way we could do it. Second way we could do it is if we ignore everything I just did, and this way is way easier, okay? That was a lot of steps. Let me get back to the point where I don't have those in there. Okay. Because we already created if I go back to this family, because we already created a square leg type and a turned leg type, we can save ourselves some work in the host family. And we will use a new type of parameter called the family type parameter. That's very confusing. We will use a new type of parameter called the family type parameter. I know, I said like the same thing 10 times. Okay, all you got to do in this case is click on all four of these legs at the same time. And then up here, you see where it says label? We can click on that and click add parameter, right? And now you can see here, type of parameter, family type furniture. Okay, now I can call this parameter leg type and then make an instance, all right, and then set this to, again, construction. So now what this does is it basically does the same thing in way less steps. When I go in here to family types, I get this option here and it says, okay, what type of leg do you want? Right now it's set to square leg, but if I change it to turn leg, it's going to change it for me, okay? So it's the exact same thing, but it's way less steps, okay? So if you can make something a family type parameter like I just did, do that. There are some drawbacks to doing it this way too, but that's beyond what we're going to get into, so don't worry about it for this. So if you ever want to make something a family type parameter and save yourself the headache of linking all the parameters like I just did a few minutes ago, do that because it's way easier. Okay, so last thing is going to be making a material parameter for the top. So that's as easy as clicking it and then going here to the material and then assigning it a new material. So this one is going to be top. Okay, and I'm going to make that a type. Okay. All right, so let's make this again oak. So what you can do is you can copy and paste to make it a little bit easier on yourself. So it's going to be the same material as the legs now, which is perfect. All right, cool. So to reinforce really quickly, I don't want to like overcomplicate things, but to reinforce instance parameter versus type parameter. Right now, leg and top, there are two material parameters, are type parameters. And I can tell that just by looking at them because it doesn't have this word default after it. If it's got the word default after it, that means it's an instance parameter. Okay? So what I can do with a type parameter is I can tie it to these type dropdowns. So for example, I could have these dimensions and then I could say oak. Okay, so we could have a wooden table. All right, so there's those dimensions wooden. Now, let me make a new type. We'll do those same dimensions, but we'll do plastic laminate. All right, so we have 24, 36, 24 wooden, 24, 36, 24 plastic laminate. So now I can go in here, and because it's a type parameter, I can very quickly, let's make a new material, create a plastic laminate, and let's look up plastic. Okay, let's go ahead and use plastic laminate white right there. Perfect. Click apply. Okay. And then same thing here. Okay. So we have plastic laminate and then we have wooden. So we can control the materials on a type basis with the drop down. Okay, so that's when you would want to use a type parameter if you want to control it like that. Instance parameter, something like corner radius, is something I want to control from one object to the next, okay? On a case-by-case basis. So I set the corner radius to be 2 inches, okay? So now, if I were to load this back into my project, let's overwrite that. Okay. And I go here to a 3D view so that we can see it. Go here to realistic. With an instance parameter, if I were to create 2 types of this, or 2 copies, I'm sorry, right? Same exact thing. I can click on one of them and I can control independently top corner radius. So maybe one of them, I want that to be a corner radius of 1 inch, and the other one I want to be 2 inches. When I change it, it only changes it for this one, and it doesn't affect this one over here. However, type parameter, if I were to click on my table, go here to edit type, and then change the material that's associated with the table to something else. Sure, let's go ahead and use this one. Let's change that material on both of these, leg and top. Watch what happens to this one. It changed both of them, even though I'm editing this one. And that's because it's tied to this type right here. So if I were to change the type of this one to wooden, you can see now this one is wooden and this one is still that one because this one is set to type family 2. Okay? If I were to change this one to plastic laminate, now it's going to be plastic laminate, right? So the thing about types is if you want to make a change, you have to duplicate the type. So now you can see I have wooden 2. All right. Now, because it's a different type, so we have wooden on this one, and this one is wooden 2. I can change this one and it won't affect the other one. Okay. So let's go oak flooring on this one instead of oak. Right. Now they're different. All right, so that's when you would want to use instance versus type. If you easily just want to make a change and not affect the other one, for example, with the corner radius, let's go 4 inches on this one, right? Very easy. With a type, you got to duplicate it and do all that extra stuff to get it to work right. So you really have to think about it when you're building this out. Okay, how am I going to interact with it and what type of parameter do I want to use? Type versus instance, all right? So that's probably clear as mud, I'm sure. It's a lot to throw at you, but hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. And hopefully as you are working on your own family, those concepts, even if you don't remember exactly everything that I'm saying here, you'll remember the bits and pieces and be able to string it together and be like, oh, yeah, okay, that's what he was saying. Okay, that's the goal. You know, I throw a lot at you guys, but just the way it is, that's just the way that Revit is. There's so many concepts, and there's only so much time for us to dive into all of them. Okay, before I end this family, I'm going to show you just like one more thing. So something that I like to do to get away from the ugliness of Revit. So by default, Revit is very primitive. The geometry is very basic looking, and nothing looks very realistic because it only deals in like 5 shapes, right? We covered this last week. We have extrusion, blend, revolve, sweep, swept blend. So as much as possible, and it also depends on how picky you are, because I'm very much a perfectionist and I like things to look, as good as it can. If you're not very picky, don't worry about it as much. But I like to soften edges where I can, make it look a little bit more realistic and not like it was created by a computer. And that's really important too when you get into rendering your projects, because it's very easy to tell like if something has a razor sharp edge on it, whereas it wouldn't have that in real life, right? So if you look at a rendering and you see a razor sharp edge on an object, that's a dead giveaway that it's a rendering, right? You can make the rendering as realistic and nice looking as you want, but as soon as you see geometry that looks like that, it's just a dead giveaway and it kills the whole vibe of it, in my opinion. So what I like to do is make things look more real wherever I can. And this is a good point where you can use voids to your benefit. So we talked about voids a little bit last week, but I didn't really show you when you would want to use them. Okay, so for example, this is a perfect case. I would want to round off these edges here going around the table. I rounded off the corners, but I did not round off the bottom and top edge. The only way for me to do that is to use a void. So very quickly, this is how I would do that. Void form. And then in this case, I would want to use a void sweep because I want to carve away at that edge. I want to, just like this example shows, I want to carve away at that corner, okay? So void sweep. And I like to work in 3D when I do this. Okay, so I'm in a 3D view right now. But the thing about working in 3D is Revit needs to know where you're drawing. Because if I were to go ahead and click on sketch path to draw my sweep path, by default, Revit is going to place this at the ground. So see that when I go here to a left view, I'm drawing at the ground level. But I don't want that. I want to be drawing here at the top level. Okay. So what I want to do in this case is I want to reference my reference plane that moves with the height of my table. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this table top. Okay. Going back to my 3D view, if I were to go to, again, create void sweep, I can go here now to where it says set. Okay, I'm going to set a work plane. So I'm going to tell Revit, where do I want to draw my sketch at? And you can see in that image that it shows, by default, we're at the ground plane. So we're underneath the house, but I could switch it so I'm drawing angled to the roof plane. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So I'm going to click on set, and I'm going to get this little work plane dialog that comes up. Since I named that plane for the top of my work surface just a minute ago, if I click on this list, that plane will appear here in the list, and I can select it. And that's going to lock my sketch to it. So now I can click OK. And if I go back here to my work plane setting and click on show, I get a little preview to verify, okay, yes, I am at that level and I'm going to be drawing at the correct point. Okay, so we can turn that off. Next thing to do is actually sketch the path. So we click on sketch path and then we choose pick lines and we reference the edge all the way around. And all I have to do is hover over one edge and hit tab a couple times, and it's going to automatically chain all those edges, and then I just click once on my mouse and it draws them all for me. Okay? The only other thing to take into consideration with this is flexing. Okay? So whenever you draw a piece of geometry, right, we have to lock it to our reference planes. So now I got to go in here and I got to lock this to all of the reference planes like this. If I were to do it, actually, let me undo this. If I did it in the top-down view, I think I can just go around and click the lock icon on all of them instead of doing it the other way. So hold on. Try that. I only have to do this on two sides because I have an equality constraint. Right, this here and this here. I don't have to do it on the other. Like, I don't have to lock this one. I don't have to lock this one. So now I can lock all the corners. And then just for good measure, I'm going to add in my corner radius. So it's just clicking on these arcs, clicking on the dimension to create the dimension. Okay, selecting all these and tying this to corner radius so that I'm guaranteed that it's going to move at the same spot. And yeah, you'll see sometimes you'll get these errors that pop up. So this tells me that maybe I don't actually have to lock this. So let me actually take a step back here really quick. I'm going to unlock all these corners. And then I'm going to redo the dimensions. Okay. And hopefully it will not give me an error. Perfect. Okay, so it didn't throw an error down there, so that means I'm probably good. All right. So now I click the green check mark. That finishes the path of the sweep. Second part of this, drawing the profile of the sweep. So we have to click on select profile. And I hate how Revit does this. I click on that and then you have to click back on this tab here to switch back. edit profile. Okay, so my profile plane is this little crosshair right here. So I'm gonna click on my view cube to align my 3D view flat to my profile plane. So now, since this is a void, you want to think about what you're carving away from the edge. All right, so what I want to do is basically knock a radius off of the bottom and the top edge. So to do that, I'm just going to draw a couple lines out just from these corners, and I'm not worried about length, okay? And then we're simply going to use our fillet arc tool to add in our radius. So I click on one line and then the second line, draw my radius for both of them, and then set how big the radius is. So let's go 1/8 of an inch. Okay. So to finish this off now, I have to close this shape. So I'm drawing the negative part of this profile in. So what I like to do is take these lines and draw them out like this, and then connect them like this. Okay. So basically you get this shape, and we do that for the bottom as well. And this doesn't really matter dimension wise. It can be whatever you want. We're just worried about the arc. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense, but we're drawing basically what we're cutting away. If you think about this as like a knife, like the edge of a knife. All right, so we have one up here and one down here. So that's my profile. I click OK, green check mark, and then I go back here to modify sweep, and then I click OK again. And ta-da! You can see now it's got a nice smooth edge all the way around because I basically just cut off that edge. And if I did this correctly, and this is why it's important to flex, test all your parameters and make sure it works correctly. When I change these, Revit should just like make it work with the new dimensions and not throw an error. If it does, I have a problem. So, okay, Revit didn't give me an error. And just for confirmation, I can change these to other things. So let's try like, oh, well, that's the height. That's not going to do it. Let's try 4 feet here. Perfect. Let's try 2 feet here. Perfect. Okay, great. Last thing to check would be the corner radius. So as I change that corner radius, is my void still going to follow it correctly? So let's try 3 inches. And yes, it does. Okay, perfect. Let's try 1 inch. Cool. If you push this too far, Revit will give you an error. Okay, so there's a limit to this. So if I went 1/2 inch, still works. Let's try 1/8 of an inch. There you go. Can't create sweep. And that's because the radius here is too small for this radius to make it all the way around it, basically. So it's just simple geometry. Rule of thumb is you never want the, whatever you make this radius here, which I made it 1/8 of an inch, you always want to go at least like double that for this outer radius. Okay, and Revit will be fine with it. But again, that's all bonus. That's all optional. Everything I just showed you. I just wanted to demonstrate it because it's a little bit of an advanced concept. And if you don't understand voids, that's a good explanation of why you would use a void. Okay, because the only way you can get geometry to look nice like this is to use a void. Okay, but for your families, I'm not going to look at that too close. If you want to do that, I highly encourage it. Just to make it look nicer. That's really going to show me that you took the assignment seriously and you tried to learn new things. So if you add in voids and stuff like that, that's great. Okay, so please do it if you're willing to take on the challenge. But by no means do you have to do it for the assignment. I just wanted to demonstrate it to clarify. Other thing that I might have glossed over is because, whoops, where's my project? Right here. Because we made the legs a instance parameter, our leg type control appears here when you click on the table. Okay, so I can just set that to be square leg or turned leg, which is really cool. Super easy to change. This though is why I said there's some disadvantages to doing it this way with the family type parameter. Because I made this a furniture family, anything else in the Revit project file that is also considered a piece of furniture appears in this list, which is really stupid and I hate it. So that is the downside to doing it this way. Instead of doing it like the whole visibility parameter way I showed you, if we take the shortcut and use a family type parameter, this is going to show all kinds of extra junk that you might not care about. Okay, so kind of annoying, but at the same time, it's very convenient. Okay, let me make sure that was everything I wanted to get through. Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, so that was a lot of recap, a little bit of new concepts probably that I don't go into in the lectures, a little bit more advanced stuff. Hopefully you guys got the majority of that. And if you didn't, I totally understand. That's why I'm recording this, so that as you're going through and doing your own family, as you run into these same issues, you can reference how I fixed them and what I did and how I built it out, okay? That's really the idea. So if your eyes are glossed over right now after watching me build this out for 2 hours, I totally get it. It's fine. I'm not going to keep you any longer, so that's pretty much going to do it for the class tonight. We're going to plan on meeting again next Monday at the same time, and I think next Monday we're going to start getting into some CD stuff or CD set stuff. Before we do get into that, I'll probably very quickly touch on this. So this is a plugin called Rhino inside Revit, and I know some of you are very, experienced with Rhino at this point, hopefully. But this is a tool that I use on a daily basis as I work. It's a newer thing, and it's really, really cool. And basically what it does is you get this tab here in Revit, and if I click here, it says Rhino, and I can open Rhino inside of Revit, and I can work between the two back and forth at the same time. So I could model all my geometry here in Rhino and push it to Revit, and I could push geometry that I built in Revit to Rhino, which is really cool. So it has a lot of really practical, useful use cases, and I want to show that to you guys. And that's kind of the purpose of these live sessions too, is I want to touch on more advanced stuff that's going to be helpful and beneficial to you as you do your projects that you're not going to get just from watching the lectures, okay? So that's why I really encourage you guys, even though these are very long class sessions, to join and watch live, because I'm going to try to show you some more of this stuff that's actually really cool, and hopefully you'll think it's interesting and useful too. So next week, plan on me demoing that a little bit, and yeah, that is going to do it. Make sure you do your assignment for the week, which is Lab 1, and watch the video with the light fixture, and do the quiz. And that's all going to be due Sunday at midnight, all right? As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to text me or email me. And again, if you're hesitant on texting me, I'm totally fine with it. I actually prefer it if you text me, believe it or not, because I don't check my email as much as I check my phone. So it's easier for me to help you quicker if I see a text message, and it's just faster to reply. So if you want to text me, go for it. Okay, it's a lot easier for me to do it that way, honestly. But yeah, that's it. So have a good night. Have a good week. Ask me if you have any questions, and I will see you guys at the same time next week.